If you play as many throwback games as I do, then you're bound to have already noticed that a large majority of those titles have been inspired by only a handful of classic releases. The truth is that most of today's throwback games are either trying to be Contra, Mega Man, or Castlevania. The developers behind the new game Prison City bucks that trend by giving us an action title inspired by lesser-known greats like Taito's Power Blade series. The result is a surprisingly fresh and exciting new platformer that looks and feels like a long-lost game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. But does this game have what it takes to stand on its own, or is it just another 8-bit wannabe? That's what we're going to explore in this review of Prison City by Screenwave Media. Prison City takes us to an alternate history where Detroit was abandoned in 1994 and turned into a penal colony where the country's worst criminals are kept behind a massive wall. Now, in the year 1997, techno-terrorists have infiltrated the prison city in hopes of turning the prisoners into a fierce fighting force. Now it's up to former cop Hal Bruzer to come out of retirement and bring peace back to Detroit. We do this by traveling to 8 different parts of the city in any order, not unlike the classic Mega Man games. This includes everything from the freeways, to the sewers, to the nearby sports stadium. Each stage is guarded by a different warden, so Hal will need to fight through the level until he finds an informant who will give him a key card and access to one of the many clever bosses. Well, not all that different from your typical run-and-gun action hero, Hal uses a boomerang-style weapon that'll fly out and then quickly come back to him. What's cool about this weapon is that you can throw multiple boomerangs at once, as well as control the way they fly in the air. This turns out to be a great weapon, as it allows you to use real strategy to take out the heavily armored guards. There will be times when thrown it one way won't do all that much, but you can take off some real damage when it returns back to our hero. Now, aside from the unique weapon, Hal is also surprisingly agile for a guy who is in retirement. He can do all the usual things like slide under bullets and hang off of ledges, but what's really cool about this game is how often you have a chance to just climb. Climbing up walls and nets is a big part of this game. You'll find that this mechanic is constantly being worked into level designs in a lot of fun new ways. The truth is, the level design is the real star of Prison City. I don't care if it's something like the local zoo or something as mundane as a factory, every single stage is well thought out and brings at least 1 or 2 new ideas to the table. What's really cool is that most of the levels have multiple paths that you can take, giving us quite a bit of control over how you want to tackle each obstacle. Honestly, this is great for a game like this, where you may need to play the stage multiple times before you finally beat it. Being able to explore and find new areas keeps the stage from becoming too repetitive and predictable. And because each stage is themed, we see the different parts of the city brought to life with all kinds of wonderfully original obstacles and challenges. I had such a great time fighting my way through the preserve during an especially nasty rainstorm. It's fun because the strong winds end up tossing our hero back and forth and making his life just miserable. Over in the power plant, you'll need to contend with climbing sections that can literally electrify you. There's also the required ice level, complete with slippery surfaces and frozen platforms that will shatter into a million little pieces. While some of the enemies will carry over from one stage to the next, the obstacles tend to stick with the theme, making each level feel fresh and unique. It helps that the boss fights are just as exciting and fun as the level designs. I don't care what level you select, because every single stage ends with an amazing battle that's more than just button mashing. For example, one of the most exhilarating battles has you racing against a post-apocalyptic trucker that's straight out of the Mad Max franchise. In another stage, you'll go up against a boss that'll have you playing the most explosive game of Pong you've ever seen. There are a few more traditional boss fights too, all of which will require you to memorize the patterns and then pounce whenever you see a weakness. In that sense, Prison City really excels at mimicking the 8-bit games of our youth. I'm sure that the purists will say that it's running too many colors and would be plagued by terrible slowdowns and flickers. But this game did a great job of tricking my brain into thinking that it was from the old school. It also has a lot of knowing references to classic games, both in the enemy designs and in the unavoidable cliches. Many of the bonus stages are direct nods to the games of the 1980s and 90s, such as destroying a car like in Final Fight and Street Fighter II, or trying to disarm a bunch of bombs a la the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. This is just a full-on celebration of the era that brought us 8 and 16-bit gaming. As I'm sure you can probably imagine, most of the complaints that I might have against Prison City are also the complaints I would have against dozens of other 8-bit action games. In that sense, there's probably no use in complaining about enemies knocking our hero off of small platforms or things like that, because that's the kind of thing that's baked into the nostalgia. It's literally part of what makes these 8-bit games so memorable and challenging. That said, I did find the Prison Cities a lot easier than your typical Mega Man or Ninja Gaiden game. So if you still have PTSD from some of the more unforgiving games of that era, you may still end up having a good time with this one. That said, I did find that the climbing and hanging controls weren't always as precise as I would have liked. I have a hunch that this has more to do with the Switch D-pad than the game itself, but I found that Hal wouldn't always grab the ledge when he was supposed to. I also wish the game had more weapons and power-ups. I love the boomerang weapon, but it feels like we're missing out on something by not earning new abilities or weapons by completing each stage. Look, obviously these are minor gripes, especially when you see how fun and imaginative the level designs and boss fights are. This is a great looking throwback game that looks and sounds the part from beginning to end. It also controls exactly how you'd expect an 8-bit game to control, both in good and bad ways. Throwing a funny story with a couple super obvious twists and all kinds of fun references, and honestly you have one of the best throwback games of the year. Prison City works as both a fun side-scroller and a love letter to the 8-bit action games many of us grew up with. It absolutely nails the presentation and gameplay, going above and beyond with wonderfully conceived levels with multiple paths and memorable boss battles. Inspired by games like Shatterhand and Power Blade, this is a throwback that brings something new and different to the table. I suppose it could have used more weapons and power-ups, but that's nitpicking. If you loved the classic 2D action games from the 1980s, then prepare to fall head over heels for Hal Bruzer and his old school tactics. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite throwback game? Look, I'm specifically looking for a modern game that is trying to resemble something from the 1980s or 90s. It doesn't have to be 8-bit, but it should be something that is intentionally made to look old. I can't wait to see your picks in the comments below. In other news, I'm currently hard at work on my review of Turok 3 Remastered, as well as a new Nintendo Switch Online review crew episode. Which is gonna come out first? Well, I guess we'll see tomorrow. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.